Hi, welcome to the session Build Virtual Reality with JavaScript. I'm super excited to be here with you talking about one of my favorite things, virtual reality and mixed reality. So I'm Cassie and I am a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft. I actually focus on AI and XR, and my background is a full stack .NET software engineer, but I really just love to play with different techs, or with a different tech, I should say. Okay, so first let's go over the agenda. The other thing I want to point out is I was looking at the chat and I saw people calling out from where they're from, which is just so cool. I think this global event is really amazing. And I saw someone say they're from Minnesota. I am also from Minnesota. So that's really cool. So thanks for getting up really early with me because it's 5 a.m. here. So that's pretty amazing. All right, so here's our agenda for today. The first thing we're going to do is just talk about the quick basics of a website. I'm going to go over that really quick, but in case there's people on the call that haven't built a website before, I want to make sure you understand some of the technology that we're going to be going through. Then we're going to talk about what WebVR is and VR and spatial computing, talk about some different tools that we can use. So we're going to be talking about Babylon.js, but there's other tools that you can use to build virtual reality experiences as well. And then we're going to go into some demos on how to build the game. So just some housekeeping here. There is a code of conduct. Please be kind to each other. We're here to learn and have fun. And so let's keep it positive in the chat. So what is HTML? HTML is a markup language for browsers. And if you take a look at the left here, those are different HTML tags. And on the right, that is how it renders in a browser. JavaScript is a programming language that makes websites dynamic. It's rendered by your browser. And it helps with the static elements of HTML and CSS. And CSS creates the style that's applied to a website. So when you put all that stuff together, that's how you build a website. Okay, so now let's jump into what spatial computing is. It may be a term that you haven't heard before, but it's new and elevated world interaction using the space around us to interface with a computer. And that is virtual reality and augmented reality. And then there are some other devices. So if you think about any time you're interacting with tech and using the space, that's considered spatial computing. And so what is VR? VR is a completely virtualized world. So you put on a headset, and I'm sure many people on this call have tried it. You put on a headset and you get to go into a completely new computer-generated world. And web VR, which you may not know, you can create websites with web VR, which is, or websites that are VR, which I just think is so cool. And then you may have used things like Steam as a gaming platform where you download a client and then run that on your headset to play VR. So that has a heavier client. They're usually bigger games where with web VR, you just go to the browser and jump in the game. So I think it's interesting to think about the history of where VR has a very interesting history. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. But the first thing I want to point out is that VR works because of stereoscopic vision, which was invented in 1838. So if you really think about it, like VR started in 1838, which I think is super cool. And so how stereoscopic vision works is you actually get two images, almost identical, just slightly different, isolated to your right and your left eye. And then when your brain puts those two images together, it tricks it into seeing 3D. So that's how VR headsets work. When you put that on, that's how it's actually tricking your brain to see a 3D object. And it's called stereoscopic vision. So let's talk about some different tools that you can use to build VR experiences. So we're going to be doing WebXR with JavaScript, and we're going to be using Babylon.js. You can also do augmented reality with AR.js. There's other XR libraries out there for JavaScript as well. If you want to go more the Unity or Unreal, those are different gaming engines that allow you to build with C# or C++. And then there's different tools within those, like MRTK, which is a library of objects in order to create better experiences and quickly build, and then blueprints in Unreal. So we're going to focus on Babylon.js, but I wanted to point out some of the other technologies that are available to start building VR experiences. So what is Babylon.js? This is our library to create 3D games. It's using what's called WebGL, which is what allows us to access the GPU on the browser and create this virtualized experience. And if you haven't heard of a library before, a code library before, you can just think of it as code that some other developer wrote that you can use, and you can then create something cool. So you don't have to build your own physics engine or build your own gaming library because somebody else, some other smart developer did it for you. So that's what Babylon.js is going to do for us. And so this is the game we're going to be building. It's not done. I actually started building it about a week ago, to be honest. And we are going to be building a version of the classic game Snake. So I kind of created this like dirt box where like, you know, snakes live in the ground. I'm like, that's kind of cool. And then we have this mesh or 3D object that's a box. And then whenever it interacts with the sphere, it gets bigger. And then what happens is that it'll start increasing the speed. And then when it runs into the wall, the snake will die or game will be over. So that's kind of the basics of how the game works. And that's what we're going to see what we did today, or how it got to that point. So the other thing that I will do is I'm going to keep building this out on my Twitch stream. So definitely, if you want to keep seeing how this evolves or contribute to it on the GitHub, I think that would be absolutely amazing. So if you want to go to the website listed here, this is where the source code is, and I will jump to that in a minute. But the moderator should put that in the chat as well. So let me go here. So the first thing I want to show you, so Babylon.js has this really cool thing called a playground. And in the playground, you can go in and right in my browser, I can start playing with different example projects of Babylon.js scenes. And so if we look over here on the left, the code over here is creating my 3D experience on my right. And let's take a look at what that's doing. So it's creating my scene, it's creating my camera, and then it's giving my camera a point of view. And without a camera, the camera is the point of view of the player. So you need to have a camera so they can see. And the other thing is you need to add light. So because you're going into a completely new world, a virtualized experience, a blank slate, if you don't have any light, there is no light in your world. If you don't have any physics, there's no physics in your world, right? So it's really, really cool to think about it that way. Like you have full freedom to create whatever you can dream up. In the next thing you see here is we have a sphere. So we're creating this mesh object. And Babylon.js has a lot of built-in meshes, which I think is really, really helpful because when you start building out games, sometimes the hardest part is like, well, how do I do 3D models? How do I get this? How do I get that? You can just start with some of the basic models that are built into the library and you don't have to worry about getting those. And then you can see we're setting the Y position. And then if you go over here, you can see there's a lot of different examples that they have available for you in order for you to start thinking about how I can build something. So I still use this today when I'm like, oh, I want to do something with collisions, or I want to do something and I'm not even sure necessarily what I want to do or how to do it. I check out this Babylon.js and I go look at different examples of how other people can do it or have done it. And there's even a library where you can post your own stuff. So like if I were to change this, I can save it and then I can also share it with my friends. I could come in here, I could prototype something and I could quickly share it with the community, share it with my friend without ever having to figure out how to deploy it or anything. So the cool thing about this as well is along with those basic objects that are available, you can add custom textures based on an image. So this is a built-in sphere and I've just wrapped it, or they wrapped it with a crate image to now make it look like a crate. So you can do a lot with that, those meshes that are available in the library. And so definitely start there when you're starting to build different things. So I will flip to the GitHub now. So this is the GitHub page that you'll go to when you end up on that short link. And here you'll see we'll have some different intro information. What is Babylon.js and Canon.js? So Canon.js is the physics engine that we're using, and physics is going to add gravity and collision and give our objects mass. And then we have TypeScript. So TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. So you can still do vanilla JavaScript in TypeScript, but TypeScript makes it statically typed so I can actually get IntelliSense in different really helpful things. So the project that I have here is actually using TypeScript and then it transpiles into JavaScript. So when you go down on here, you'll see that there's going to be two different options. We have this, just go ahead and get started with the project the way it is now, or you can go step by step with building it out. And I'm going to show you this starter template that I have here. Actually, do I have it up already? Yeah. Oh, I hit Visual Studio. I'm not even sure how I did that. Okay. Go away, Visual Studio. There we go. Visual Studio wanted to be included in the presentation. That's what's going on. It's like you want to use C# and Unity. So if you do C#, you use Visual Studio. Okay, so if I go to this starter template here, I'm going to clone this repo. So I'm going to open up my Windows terminal. I'm going to go to my build profile. I'm going to git clone. And if you went to any of the intro Git things, you should have got a little bit familiar with some of these different Git commands. So I'm going to print out my directory and I see that I have my starter project here. I'm going to copy that, go to the location, and then I am going to open up that project. And so by doing code dot, that's going to open up my VS Code instance, which is a basic IDE for doing development. And it's going to open it up. The dot means in my current directory. And then I'm going to run something quick here that's npm install. So since I'm using Node, it's npm install is going to look at my package.json, and it's going to install all my different packages that I need. So if I were to go to the index.html, here's the HTML, all the HTML that's needed to create a VR site. So you just have your canvas tag, and then you have your source. And if I go into my source, I can show you here that this is the same scene that we were looking at in the Babylon.js. It's kind of like the hello world of VR. And you can see we have our scene, we have our camera, we're setting our target, those same basic things, the ground, and yeah. So this would be a really good place to start out. You can come in here, get started, and then start changing things here. And you already have the architecture set up, you already have Webpack, you have TypeScript, you have a lot of things that have done for you, so you can just worry about building your game. So my npm install is taking a minute. So why don't we flip over to, when that's done, over to my Snake VR project. So here's the one that we saw in the example. And let's see. One second, I need it. Okay, cool. So here is the basics of the index.ts for my JavaScript, or for my Snake VR game. So you can see that I'm grabbing my canvas element. I have my camera. I'm setting some, so these are some public variables that I'm doing at the top of my index.js. And then when I go to start creating my scene, you'll see that we have something different here. We've imported our physics engine so we can start adding physics to our game. Then we're going to create the snake, and there's something called the VR helper. So this is the VR experience helper, and it gives you some really neat default experience. With this one, I'm actually manually creating out my box environment that you saw. So I'll step into that so you can take a look. But there's also a default VR experience that gives you a lot of stuff for free. Where is that? Here we go. So if you go here, this is the default experience. And you can grab this, and then you'll have like an environment with some basic things that you don't have to then manually build out like we will in this game. But because I wanted some customized experiences, it worked better for me to build out my own environment. So I'm creating the box. I am giving the top mesh here, so that's the actual ceiling of it. I'm setting the XYZ rotation. I'm adding a physics imposter, and so I want to add some physics to that object, because again, without that, there is none. I'm adding the ground material, and then I'm adding the snake interaction. So let's take a look at how we're creating the interaction with that mesh. So if I go here, you can see that we can register actions in our action manager. And this is important because this is how we're going to create those dynamic events. And I'm adding an event that's on intersection enter trigger. And so what that means is I'm saying when the plane is intersected with the snake, I want to trigger this event. And when that event is triggered, what it's going to do, it's going to add particles. So if you saw in that demo, when you saw like the red kind of like explosion effect, those are particles, which we are importing from our particle project, or our particle file over here. And then I'm going to remove the snake from this scene, and then I'm going to do thread.sleep. And then I'm going to remove the particles from the mesh. So the reason I need to do that thread.sleep, and that just means I need it to wait, is because if I were to add the particles and remove them right away, you wouldn't actually get like that animation. It'd be like, it'd be there and then it'd be gone. So I need to wait for a minute. I want it to animate, and then I want to remove it from my scene. And then we're going to stop the game. So that's how you add some interactions to your mesh. And then the next thing I want to point out is this create wall. So I need to create 4 walls. And rather than having this code 4 different times, I've created a helper method to just do it for me. So anytime when you're programming, if you start doing like copy paste a lot on a particular block of code, that should be a red light to you that you should probably put that in a function, because then you can have less code and make it more functional. So I have a create wall function where I say which wall I want to create. I tell it the XYZ position. I give it the scene, the snake, and the ground material. because I need to actually create that interaction on all the different walls. Like I need it to happen when it runs into the ceiling. I need it to happen when it runs into the floor and everything. So that is how we are creating our world. The other thing I want to point out too is you'll notice that I have all these different files broken out here when you're like, well, why isn't all in one? There's a few different reasons. One is maintainability, and when you start getting a lot of code in there, it makes it a lot easier to find things and move around. There's also something called encapsulation, so I can have private methods, meaning it's only available in that class that won't be available to me in other ones because I don't need it there. So it just makes it for a cleaner, better project if you have it broken out and you have and you just import what you need into different classes. So let's take a look at how we're creating these register snake controllers. So if I go into here, you can see I'm passing in the VR helper, and in the VR helper, it's going to let me access the web VR controller. So that's how, when I'm moving the left and right triggers, I'm able to move the snake because I'm grabbing that event. So I'm doing an on change event of the sticks, the joysticks on the controller. So you take a look here. Oh wait, I don't know if you see my video right now. Okay. Anyway, so when the joystick moves, then you can create an event. So when that event happens, I'm checking which hand it is because my right hand is controlling one axis and my Z axis, and then my left hand's actually controlling my X and Y axis. So when that happens, I take a look at, oh, and this is logging the values. So when you're programming in JavaScript, it's helpful to log out what's happening so that you can better debug and see what's happening. So like if I want to know why is when I go right with my controller, it's going left, like I can easily see what values are happening with the joystick, and then I know how to change it. And then from there, you can see I'm creating the animation when it actually happens. So I'm adding that animation to the snake. All right, let's go back up here. And I want to get this project. Okay, cool. So my npm install finished. You can ignore the warnings. I wanted to show you quickly how you get started with this. So we did npm install. Now I want to run a build to get my output. So I'm flipping back to my original kind of starter project, just so if you get done with this, and these instructions are in the GitHub as well, but so you can go in, you can grab that and get started easily. So I'm running that build. That's going to take my TypeScript, it's going to transpile it into JavaScript, make that output folder, and then I can do npm start, and this is going to start my local server and give me my website so I can take a look at how it's running. All right, so localhost is running, so I should be able to refresh here now. And then we should be able to see our VR scene. Takes a minute to load. There we go. Cool. So now you can see that starter project is the exact starter project in the playground. And so you could come in here and start building out a different game. So you could fork this starter project, clone it to your locally, and start playing around. And then to stop it, you just go Control-C and yes. Okay, so let's keep looking through the different things that we did in order to create this game. So we've looked at a little bit how we created the environment, how we added interactions. We added a label, so how you get that information to the user. So when you start thinking about user experience, they need to know what to do, how to play your game. So that's adding a label to the scene is how we're doing that. And let me see what else. So let's take a look at the noms. So the snake is eating noms because they're nummy. And here we can see that we're adding the noms. So if we take a look at what's happening here, I'm calling the add grape function. So I'm working on adding actual meshes. So if you go to the assets here, you'll see that there's apples, grapes, and oranges, and a snake that I started creating with Paint 3D. And so in this particular one, I'm adding the noms to the scene, but I'm also creating a sphere because I'm still working on that. It's not working right yet. And the sphere is then adding that material. So remember when I was talking about how we added that texture? Right now, I'm just wrapping it with an orange material, so it kind of looks like an orange. I'm setting its position, And I'm doing that randomly because I want it to not always appear in the same spot. So I'm using math.random to get a random number, multiplying by 5, so that I get a sphere or a nom to appear within my box environment. Because if it is too big, if the number's too big and it goes outside of the box, then the game is broken, right? Because I can't actually interact with that. And because the event on the sphere, which we'll take a look at here, we also have an on interaction with the sphere. And so we're adding this to our food mesh. We're adding a trigger event, and we're passing in the snake, since this is what we want to trigger the event when these two objects collide. Then we are adding particles to the mesh, again, because we want to have that animation. And then we are going to remove it, again, thread.sleep, because we want to actually see that animation for a little while. And then we're going to increment the score. So there's a score on there every time that the snake runs into this object. We have a score running, so you can actually see how many you've gotten and how far you are. I'm playing with the speed of the snake still. So right now, every time this happens, I'm increasing it. I'm doubling it. I'm still kind of playing with that. I'm not sure if it's working right yet. So there are some things in here that, like I said, I started building this about a week ago that I'm still working on. So then we're adding in place. And then I want to point out this. So if you look here, I'm calling add nom within the add nom function. And this is something called recursion. And I'm calling it's a method that is itself within itself, which is a really neat feature within or that to use. It can be scary though, because you can create infinite loops. But this one is important because I want to then create a new nom every time it is this one is eaten, essentially. Okay, so that was a lot of information. I'll kind of stop there on this particular game, but hopefully that gives you enough of an introduction to how to start building either in this game or a different game. Because the other thing I want to show you is that, let's see, I'm going to show this. I made this video and I'm just going to play it quick here. But basically, you can use 3D Paint to get objects. So one of the things when you're starting out and you want to get different models in your project, and you don't necessarily want to learn any complex 3D modeling software and it takes a long time, you can go to 3D Paint, you can use the library, you can grab it, then you can import it into this sandbox.babylon.js, which allows you to play with that, and then you can export it to the Babylon format. So it's a really quick and easy way to get meshes very quickly. All right, let's go back to here. So there's another game in here that you could check out as well. And this is, again, all available on that GitHub. This is the one, if you were in the student zone last year, that we built out called Exploding Spheres. And this one also has step-by-step instructions on how to build it. So if you want to check out this one, definitely do that. And it goes through some of those same basics, how you add a mesh, how you start the game, how you add particles. All right, let's go back into our presentation. So we went through a lot of information there. I hope that you're inspired to start learning more about Babylon.js and about building games. Sorry, hang on, my interactions are not working. There we go. Okay. Cool. And so I want to point out, like we talked about how you can build a game with Babylon.js. And we talked about gaming in particular, but mixed reality isn't just for gaming. There is a lot of different applications. There's things like cinema VR. There is social entertainment things. Like there's a Alt Space VR conference that's actually happening. So Mixed Reality Dev Days that starts today. And so there's so many different ways that VR is actually just changing the way that we do things, which I just think it makes me really excited because I love it. And AR too, and augmented reality. So if you want to continue learning more about VR and AR, check out this short link, register for MR Dev Days. I'll be hosting a couple sessions. It's going to be super fun. It's going to be a little bit more advanced, but I still think there'll be something for everybody. And there is a Babylon.js one where they're going to talk more about what's happening with the product. And lastly, I want to talk about this quote that I just really love from Satya. So if you change the way you see the world, you can change the world you see. And with VR, you're given a blank slate to dream up anything. So it is a super powerful and amazing tool to get started with and to learn more about. So what's next in the student zone? We have There's some more sessions, I think, still. I actually don't know the full schedule, sorry. And then there's a short link there where you can go and check. There's that link that I had for you that goes to the GitHub, and there's all the links from all the other amazing sessions in the student zone. Check out Azure for Students. You get $800 credit. So if you do want to host your own game, you can do that for super cheap using our static storage or our Azure storage to host a static website. And in the Exploding Spheres tutorial, I go step by step in how you can actually deploy your WebVR game with Azure. So thank you so much. I know that was a lot of information, but I hope you were able to kind of understand how you can start really quickly and easily building games with Babylon.js. So I'll take a look at the questions now.
Thank you, Casey. I can actually ask you the questions because there were, I think, a couple of interesting questions.
Okay.
Yeah, the first one is, does Babylon.js and AR.js integrate with Azure Spatial?
With Azure Spatial?
Right.
Like spatial anchors?
Yeah, the cloud side of the technologies.
Yes, it does. So the Azure Spatial Anchors is definitely a service you can set up. And if you're not familiar with Azure Spatial Anchors, it's really, really cool. It allows you to create an anchor in the real world that you can interact with in virtual reality or augmented reality. And so it's cool for shared experiences. So if you have, like, let's say someone has a HoloLens on and someone has a tablet and someone has a phone, using spatial anchors and WebXR, you can all be sharing a virtualized augmented reality experience on different devices at the same time. So Azure Spatial Anchors is really cool. There's a talk at the conference, the Mixed Reality Dev Days, that's going to talk more about Azure Spatial Anchors as well. So yeah, you could definitely use that with Babylon.js.
One more question. How can you compare it to other technologies like Play Canvas or 3JS? How do they compare to Babylon.js?
That is a really good question. I have never used the other ones, so I can't actually do a compare. I kind of just jumped in with Babylon, and I really like it. So I haven't played it with some of the other ones, but I should make some time to do that. But generally, when I make time to play with WebVR, I have an idea of something that I'm excited to build, and then I just jump in and start building that. And so since I've already been familiar with the Babylon.js, that's kind of the one I always go to.
Right. There are a lot of questions on how do you start learning that? What would you suggest?
Yeah. So the playground, 100% the playground. Go start looking at the examples, play with the code on the left, hit play, see how it affects everything on the right. That's a really good way to start. But the other thing that I think is really the best way to learn something is to have a goal and then just try to get there. So think of something really basic that you could build. Maybe just a simple, like having a mesh in the environment and have it interact and use that particle system, right? So you could grab the particle system from the code that I have in my repos. So start small, start pulling apart how things work. The starter project, I think, is really great as well if you want to get, once you're past, like, okay, I've played with the playground a little bit and I'm seeing how I start interacting. The other thing is I'm planning on my Twitch stream to do more Babylon.js stuff. Another one of my cloud advocates, April, she is doing some really neat Twitch streams as well on VR development with Unity. So I would say there's so many resources out there, and I know it's hard to be like, where do I start? But those are good ones. The other thing is I'm going to keep adding issues into that GitHub repo. So if you just want to be like, I want to figure out how to add, this mesh into the scene, you can grab one of the issues in that particular repo. You can clone the project and try to implement that feature. So you already have everything there. And what happens when you're going to do that is you're going to start figuring out what's happening in the project, because you're going to have to kind of reverse engineer what's happening. And then when you start doing that, it's going to start clicking on how those things are put together. And then you can figure out how to change that. So those are some different ways that you can get started.
Thank you, Casey. That was really great advice to students on how to start learning. And a good place would be the repository for this project, and maybe watching the session again and recording. Thanks a lot. And I think that concludes our session. Thanks to all attendees for watching.
Yeah, thank you.